Philosophy is a really, really broad topic. There are a bunch of sub-disciplines within the discipline of philosophy, and there's a bunch of practicality to it. There's a bunch of ethics and philosophy of law and all sorts of things that impact our daily lives. But there are also really out there stonery question type things that we talk about in philosophy as well. Things like inverted qualia, or the inverted color spectra. Like, what if I'm seeing highlighter pink here, but what if you're seeing highlighter yellow? And we both say, like, yeah, that's highlighter pink. This is highlighter pink. But what your word pink refers to is actually highlighter yellow. How could I ever get beyond my own categories and see and check? We're both using the same word, but maybe your color spectrum is systematically inverted. So that anytime you say, well, that's blue, obviously. Yeah, but it looks like orange to you. How could I even know that? There's no way. I can't get out into your head and experience that. So that's pretty crazy. And you may think, who cares about that? Well, you can actually build an argument against different theories of mind if inverted color spectrum or spectra is possible. If it's possible for you to have a different color experience or to be systematically inverted in what you're seeing color-wise, then it looks like theories of mind that are reductionist, that reduce the mind to the brain, may not be true. Because if your mind was reducible to your brain, then we all should, like, necessarily see the same thing if we have the same kinds of brains. But if it's possible that we're seeing different colors, then it looks like we're more than just our physical brains. So that's way too reductionistic of a take on that argument. If you want to see more, I'll leave a link to inverted qualia so that you can see it in a more beefed up form. All that to say, philosophy talks about really weird stuff that does have practical implications and applications in life, but they're also really weird and goofy and trippy. And so in this video, I want to share the trippiest thing that I've learned in the past 12 years of studying philosophy. This video is sponsored by ParkNotes. It's a really cool little device that uses AI in order to help you think more clearly. Instead of offloading your thoughts and letting AI think for you, it is a tool that helps you think better. And so I'm going to turn this on and then I'll show you how you can make a mind map using ParkNotes to help yourself get more clear on your own ideas. But more on that later. Let's jump in with the trippiest thing I learned in studying philosophy for the past 12 or 13 years. Okay, so the trippiest thing comes from Thomas Nagel's book, The View from Nowhere. This is top 5 favorite philosophy book of all time. This is so good. I love this book. You should read this book. I will leave an affiliate link in the description so you can support me if you grab the book there. While I was reading The View from Nowhere, I also was reading all of C.S. Lewis's essays, and so I found an essay called Meditation in a Tool Shed, where the same idea, the trippiest idea, was put forward by C.S. Lewis. So you can find that essay in this book, Compelling Reason. It's a collection of some of his best essays. And again, you can find a link in the description. But the idea that's super trippy, that I still think about, that I've been thinking about for 12 years, is that reality is more than objective reality. Let me say that again. Reality is not just objective reality. Now, some of you may be like freaking out and that's super trippy and you're excited about it. Others are like, yeah, that's obvious. Of course that's true. I get it. I get it if you think that that's just super easy on to the next, but that's actually a really, really trippy fact because you think objective reality is supposed to include everything. It's objective. You know, it's not just from a subjective point of view. Objective reality seems like it would be everything, but in that it's objective reality, it's missing subjective reality, like my own experience of color, right? Like it's missing the subjective perspective. It's missing the subject. Now, it may include like you as an object, but it's not including mine. But I don't think so. I think it's not including subjective perspectives if it's the objective perspective. Here's a point that Nagel makes in the title of his book. It's called The View from Nowhere. If you're just getting to an objective perspective, what is that perspective? Where is it? We always think of it as like right here or in a science lab or something like that. But why isn't it like 70 feet above me? Why isn't it from a giant's perspective or from space or from the dark side of the moon. Like, where is that objective perspective? And if you're only focusing on the objective, where are all the subjects? It looks like reality has to include subjective reality, and that's at odds with objective reality. And so you have all these billions of human perspectives that are subjects, that are subjective. It looks like there's billions of holes in objective reality. And it looks like we can't ever get to those perspectives. I can never get there. I can't go and experience what it's like to be you. I can imagine what it's like to be you. I can imagine what it would be like if I were you, but I can't put myself in your perspective. That's crazy. That's nuts. Now, Thomas Nagel is one of the best living philosophers. So I'm tempted to just appeal to authority here and be like, if this guy thinks it's crazy enough to write an entire book about, then yeah, it's super crazy. But I'm trying to motivate it for you guys, so I'm not just appealing to his authority. Nagel says, this book is about a single problem: how to combine the perspective of a particular person inside the world with an objective view of the same world, the person and his viewpoint included. Now, trying to unify the objective and the subjective to include all of reality is really hard. Where do you even go about starting this? Nagel says if you start from the subjective perspective, then you may end up in idealism, where you think everything out there is just ideas. There's no real physical reality after all, because you're starting with the subject. Or you end up in solipsism, the view that only you exist. Or you may end up in global skepticism, where you think you are the only thing that exists. Maybe everything else is just a figment of your imagination. That's like solipsism, but maybe you don't think anything else exists at all. That's the problem of starting with the subject. But if you start from the objective perspective, then how do you account for yourself or your point of view or the point of view of others, both similar and dissimilar? So other human beings, but also dogs and hippopotami, whatever the plural is for that, elephants, bugs, all sorts of things that we think do have perspectives. Maybe bugs don't, but bats or whatever. How do you account for points of view that are similar and dissimilar to yourself? And then how about the objects of various types of judgment that seem to emanate from those perspectives? So that would be things that aren't necessarily objects in and of themselves, but belong to the world of persons. I don't know, maybe something like Pokemon Go or some other aspect of the socially constructed world that we do also inhabit on top of the natural world. So Nagel says that starting with the objective perspective leads you to something like the obverse of historical skepticism, where historical skepticism is global skepticism. It's skepticism about everything but yourself. And starting with the objective perspective leads to skepticism about yourself and subjective perspectives, which is really, really wild to think about. Yes, I have the whole world out there, but I don't have myself anymore. And that is self-defeating. You can't escape from the self. So all that to say, reality is not just objective reality. So Nagel says sometimes in the philosophy of mind, but also elsewhere, the truth is not to be found by traveling as far away from one's personal perspective as possible. That's such a good line. Now, in the book, he covers ethics and the philosophy of mind and epistemology and all sorts of really cool, fun stuff. It's going to be a tough read, but it's really, really worth it. And he's got some amazing lines, like I shared with you. So I think this is a pretty trippy problem to think through. We have all these subjective perspectives that we have to account for in objective reality, and yet the two are at odds with one another. And so we have reality, and then we have two subsections of reality, objective reality and subjective reality. And I think this tracks with Wilfrid Sellars' idea of the manifest image and the scientific image. The manifest image being the image of the world that human persons inhabit, where we think about truth and justice and love and the transcendentals and stuff like that. And we think about human rights. But then we also have this scientific image where we look at the fundamental particles that make us all up, that are constituents of material reality, where you think like, I have a hand, I have a physical hand, and I'm able to make a fist, and that's seen in the manifest image. But if I just look at it through the scientific lens, then it's really mostly empty space and water and all this scientific stuff. So we have the manifest image, which has persons at the center, and we have the scientific image, which has the fundamental microphysical particles, whatever those may be it strings or electron clouds or whatever is deepest down there at bedrock, if there even is one. Now, C.S. Lewis also talks about the manifest and the scientific image, the subjective and the objective perspectives in his essay Meditation in a Tool Shed, like I mentioned. And Lewis says, hey, look, I was in a tool shed recently, and I looked up at the top of the door, and there was a crack letting light in, and I could see this light beam, and I could see a bunch of dust motes in the light beam. And I realized I can look at the light beam and I can see it for what it is, and I can see the dust particles, but I can also turn my head and look up through the crack and see the outside world. I can see trees and all sorts of stuff. So I can look at the light beam and I can look along the light beam. So there's two different ways of looking at and looking along. Looking at would be the scientific image, and looking along is that manifest image or the subjective perspective or the Lebenswelt of Husserl, the world of meaning and persons. So Lewis's whole essay is about justifying the subjective perspective and arguing in its favor, because at this point in history, when he's writing the essay, the third-person perspective is really beating up on the first person. The scientists are trying to explain away things like love. Love is just chemical reactions in your brain because of a biological impulse that a young man has seen a young woman, and that phenomena has sparked up all his brain workings. And Lewis is like, no, there's also love. There's also the world of the persons, and you can't get rid of that. That's a real, genuine thing. It's not just reducible to the scientific image. Lewis also gives us an example of a mathematician. He's sitting in an armchair, and he's contemplating deep, universal truths of mathematics. But a cerebral physiologist, as Lewis says, neurobiologist, whoever is looking at brains, they can come along and say, yes, I know that the mathematician thinks he's contemplating universal truths, but actually what's happening inside his skull is just the movements of gray matter or the passing of neurotransmitters across synapses and all that stuff. Lewis says, which one of those pictures is more true or valid or a more accurate description of what's going on? He says it's not just that third-person perspective, because you can keep doing that. You can do that same reduction to the cerebral physicist. Just do a whole chain of another physicist looking at him, or neurobiologist, whatever language you want to use. Let's say neurobiologist. Just have a whole string of them. Actually, what that neurobiologist is doing, though he thinks he's giving an account of what's going on in the mathematician's brain, what he's really doing is just having his own brain fizz as well. And on and on and on we go, reducing each other's actions to just the physical goings on of the brain. So Lewis says you can never actually discount the first person perspective, that subjective perspective, that looking along the light beam and not just at it. You can never fully discount that because you're discounting it from your own subjective perspective. So you're presupposing the thing that you're trying to debunk or reduce or eliminate. You can't actually do that. You have a subjective perspective, and from that perspective, you're trying to make the argument that only the objective is meaningful or valid or true. So Lewis says, in other words, you can step outside one experience only by stepping inside another. Therefore, if all inside experiences are misleading, we are always misled. So if we don't want an infinite regress of neurobiologists just explaining away our subjective perspectives, what are we to do? Lewis says, where is the rot to end? The answer is that we must never allow the rot to begin. We must, on pain of idiocy, deny from the very outset the idea that looking at is by its own nature intrinsically truer or better than looking along. One must look both along and at everything. In particular cases, we shall find reason for regarding the one or the other vision as inferior. Thus, the inside vision of rational thinking must be truer than the outside vision, which sees only movements of gray matter. For if the outside vision were the correct one, all thoughts, including this thought, would be valueless, and this is self-contradictory. You cannot have a proof that there are no proofs. So this is actually a quick take on C.S. Lewis's argument from reason. He's arguing that our reasoning capacities, our thoughts, cannot be wholly reducible, or maybe even reducible at all, to the physical goings-on of the brain. Because what happens in our brain is subject to non-rational causes. And when we have valid thoughts or true thoughts or thoughts that follow logically from one another, those are subject to the laws of thought, the laws of logic. That's rational causation, or maybe even agent causation, but not non-rational physical causation, like a billiard ball hitting another one into a third one. So again, maybe I'll do a whole video on C.S. Lewis's argument from reason. But if you want to read more about that, then jump into my Substack read-along of C.S. Lewis's Miracles on Substack. You can find a link in the description. So that's it. That is the trippiest idea that I've learned. I've studied a lot of philosophy and learned a lot of really weird things, but this one keeps coming back, and it always makes me think deeply. It always confounds me. The fact that we have a reality that is larger than objective reality, and it includes billions, at least billions, of subjective perspectives. This also has implications for theology. So if you think that God is omniscient, omniscientia, all-knowing, he has all knowledge, then God must also have knowledge of subjective perspectives. He must know what it's like to be me, and to be you, and to be my dog Theophilus, who keeps barking. He has to have all of that knowledge. He has to know what it's like to eat a Chicago-style hot dog, even though he's spirit. How does he know that? That's another really trippy aspect to this problem of the objective and subjective and reality. Now, there are different answers to it. This idea of omnisubjectivity was put forth by Linda Zagzebski, and I had her on my podcast to talk about that. You can find a link in the description. One of my friends that I was discipling when he was in college, he brought up this idea about imagination, and I think this is also what Linda brings up in her treatment of omnisubjectivity. But this idea that you know what it's like to lick things you've never licked. You can just imagine it. So you can't see that this is a really textured book, but maybe you can hear that. I've never licked this book, but I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I know what it would be like to lick that book. Just because, I don't know, I have that kind of know-how knowledge that can extend to things I haven't even licked yet. So if I have that with my limited imagination and my limited knowledge, then how much more would God have that with his unlimited knowledge? So maybe you're saying, hey, I base that off of past experiences, but God wouldn't need to have past experiences if he is who he says he is. If he has free and natural knowledge, if he's created all things, then he knows what it would be like to be me eating a Chicago-style hot dog, or maybe just eating a Chicago-style hot dog in general. But maybe that experience doesn't actually exist. Maybe that's the kind of thing that must necessarily be embodied by someone eating it. So it'll taste different to me than it'll taste to my dog, and the omnisubjective God would know what it's like in either case. Okay, so you can see that it's pretty trippy because I'm already getting caught up in it again. It has lots of different implications. If you guys want to learn more about that, then definitely grab The View from Nowhere and from the link in the description, or grab Compelling Reasons and check out Meditation in a Toolshed by C.S. Lewis. Or grab both because they're really helpful. Thomas Nagel is saying, like, we can't escape this problem. C.S. Lewis is also saying we can't escape this problem, but you may not. You are not allowed to. You can't just beat up on the first person with the third person perspective. They're both doing that. He's kind of lamenting it. He's kind of reveling in it. So check those out. And also check out Linda Zagzebski's omnisubjectivity stuff. She came out with a book recently on that, and we talked on my podcast about it as well. So I promised you guys that I would show you how you can use ParkNotes to think more deeply and more clearly. And so I'm going to show you how I've made a mind map of this very episode in order to help myself think clearly about this stuff and to make sure I've covered all the points I wanted to cover from the different thinkers in this video. Okay, so I have this full ParkNotes video. I have it recorded on my ParkNote. I open up my ParkNote app. I go to all files. I click on the recent file, and then I'm just going to generate a summary. I click generate, and then it will transcribe the audio that I recorded into a transcript. And then from there, I can make a mind map. So this tool is really helpful for me, especially when I'm making my ParkNotes content, because I can generate a transcript and read the transcript instead of listening back over to my video again and again to make sure I hit all the points I want to cover. And then by turning that into a mind map, I'm able to see my thoughts right there on the screen and see how they're connected. I'm not letting PlotNote think for me, but I am using it as a tool to help me see all of my thoughts laid out right there. One of the very best use cases that I've found is when I'm driving, I can't take notes, and it's super dangerous to even try. But if I have PlotNote with me, I can speak into it and give myself reminders. I can talk about science fiction stories I want to write, ParkNotes videos, Parker's Ponderings, Substack, essays, all the things I want to remember. I can put them in here while I'm driving, and I can do it without being dangerous on the road. So if you want to check out PlotNote for yourself, and I think you should, check out the link in my description or in the pinned comment. And big thanks to PlotNote for sponsoring this video. All right, that's going to do it for now. If you guys made it this far into the video, then you're awesome. Leave me a little thinking emoji, and I'll catch you guys next time.